In my first video of asking who the GOAT is, I started with quarterbacks whose careers mostly took place before 1980. In this video, I'm going to be talking about quarterbacks after 1980. Joe Montana was on the 49ers before 1980, but I think most people will remember his career during the 1980s. But aside from Joe Montana, the candidates for who is the greatest quarterback of all time that I'm going to be going over are John Elway, Dan Marino, Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and Aaron Rodgers. A couple of notable candidates that I decided to not go over in this video include Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Dan Fouts, or even Warren Moon, and honestly many others. And I want to emphasize again that every one of these quarterbacks had their fair share of shortcomings, moments of underachieving, and moments of choking. These quarterbacks are not gods, and they are far from it, actually. Also, I'm probably going to be a little more critical of some of these guys than I was in the prior video. But let's go ahead and talk about these guys' careers. Let's start this off by talking about the Joe Montana, four-time Super Bowl champion. And in his 4 Super Bowl appearances, he averaged 285.5 yards per game, 2.75 touchdowns per game, 0 interceptions, and had a 9.4 yards per pass attempt. He was a 3-time Super Bowl MVP, a 3-time NFL MVP. He led the NFL in completion percentage 5 times. He led the NFL in touchdown passes twice. When Joe Montana retired, he was 4th all-time in passing yards and passing touchdowns, and he retired 2nd all-time in completion percentage, with a minimum of 100 pass attempts. He also wasn't too bad of a scrambler. He had 1,676 career rushing yards and 20 career rushing touchdowns. His 5 playoff fourth quarter comebacks are 2nd all-time, and his 5 playoff game-winning drives are top 5 all-time. Now, I want to go over one argument that I personally don't understand why it gets used. This is not at all to discredit Joe Montana, because he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, 100%. And if you wanted to call him the GOAT, I wouldn't be mad at you, and I don't think anyone should be mad at you. However, using the facts that he is 4-0 in Super Bowls is kind of silly to me. If Joe Montana made it to the Super Bowl 4 times, then that means there were 11 seasons in which he did not make it to the Super Bowl, and that 11 seasons excludes the season that he missed. And also, if we're going to use he's 4-0 in Super Bowls, and Tom Brady's only 6-3, again, Tom Brady made it 9 times. Joe Montana made it 4 times. Let me ask you this. What's worse for your career? Getting upset by a team that you were double-digit favorites against in the divisional round? Or getting upset by a team you were double-digit favorites against in a Super Bowl? Which one's worse? Because Joe Montana was, in fact, upset by a team that his team was double-digit favorites over in the divisional round. And to further emphasize my point about his 4-0 in Super Bowls argument is kind of silly, Joe Montana, from 1985 to 1987, lost 3 straight playoff games. His stat line read like this, and it's not a typo: 0 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Joe Montana may not have been the ultimate problem in his playoff losses, but it's not like he was saving his team either. Also, I see people like to use the facts that he never threw an interception in the Super Bowl. Okay, so does that absolve the interceptions he threw in his other playoff games that the 49ers lost? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So I'll let you, the viewer, decide that. So like I said, the 4-0 in Super Bowls argument is kind of silly. But also with that said, Joe Montana most certainly deserves consideration as the greatest quarterback of all time. He was clutch, could do it all, and could produce in many different ways. Dan Marino is one of the most electrifying quarterbacks in NFL history, I would say. He retired as NFL's all-time leader in passing yards and passing touchdowns. He retired as the NFL's all-time leader in game-winning drives. Marino carried his teams to winning records on multiple occasions, like in 1985 when he had the 12 out of 28 defense and the 18 out of 28 rushing attack, the 11 out of 28 defense and 24 out of 28 rushing attack in 1992, the 17 out of 28 defense and 13 out of 28 ranked rushing attack in 94, and the 16 out of 30 defense and 29 out of 30 rushing attack in 1997. Of course, defense and rushing rank is not the perfect way to describe if your quarterback is carrying your team, because that doesn't factor in offensive line or weapons or anything like that. But for simplicity in this video, I think using rushing rank and defense rank is an adequate start. It should be noted also that Dan Marino did, for the most part in his career, have a pretty loaded supporting cast on offense. From Mark Clayton to Dwight Stevenson to Mark Duper to Keith Jackson, stuff like that. But with all that said, Marino was an amazing thrower of the football. He is one of 8 quarterbacks that I could find to average 300 plus passing yards per game en route to getting to the Super Bowl or en route to winning the Super Bowl. I put an asterisk because I said of the quarterbacks that I could find. There could be more, but as far as I know, there are 8 quarterbacks to average 300 plus yards per game en route to getting to the Super Bowl or winning the Super Bowl. And those yards are strictly in the playoffs. Now, is Dan Marino the GOAT? Honestly, personally to me, I can't rank him as the GOAT. At the very least, though, Dan Marino deserves consideration as the GOAT, though. He carried the Dolphins on multiple occasions. He made players around him better. He made his offensive line in particular better. And he is one of the most prolific passers in NFL history. John Elway, even with the passing explosion that we are witnessing right now, still ranks 9th all-time in passing yards, and he retired 2nd all-time in passing yards. He ranks 12th all-time in passing touchdowns, and he retired 3rd all-time in that category. He was a one-time NFL MVP and a one-time Super Bowl MVP. Now, Elway did carry his team at times. Like in 1985, he took his team to an 11-5 record with the 13 out of 28 defense and the 16 out of 28 rushing attack. He had 6 fourth-quarter comebacks and 6 game-winning drives. Both of those categories led the NFL. Just an average at best supporting cast, probably. In 1986, Elway took his team to an 11-5 record with a below-average rushing attack and a below-average defense. In 1993, Elway had a pretty okay defense, 10 out of 28, but he didn't really have that much of a rushing attack, as his rushing rank ranked 18 out of 28. Elway is 7th all-time in game-winning drives, and he is 6th all-time in fourth-quarter comebacks. Like I said, I'm going to be a little more critical of certain players, and this is one of those times right now. Favre should have been a 3-time Super Bowl champion, at the very least. He was too good to have ended his career with just 1 Super Bowl win. With that said, though, Brett Favre was an absolutely prolific passer. He retired as the all-time leader in passing yards and touchdowns. I'm laughing because it feels like I've said that about pretty much everybody so far. He currently is tied for the 2nd most consecutive seasons with 30-plus touchdown passes from 1994 to 1998. He is tied for the most consecutive seasons with 35 touchdown passes from 1995 to 1997. His 9 seasons with 30 or more touchdown passes are top 3 all time. And Favre was pretty solid at carrying his football teams, taking below-average defenses and below-average rushing attacks to winning records on multiple occasions. So Favre had some interesting throws, we'll just say that. The one that will always stand out to me, though, is the interception in the NFC divisional round against the Eagles. That interception has a case for being the worst decision of all time, honestly. It's like, what were you thinking, dude? And I love what Chris Collinsworth said. You could tell he felt a little bad for Favre, but he also knew the reality. I think Chris Collinsworth said something along the lines of, if a rookie made that throw, you'd be getting in their face and telling them, you can't do that, dude. So you gotta do the same thing to Favre. I didn't quote exactly what Collinsworth said word for word, but it was along those lines. I guess one of the reasons I said he should have been at least a 3-time Super Bowl champion is because he kind of did some of the damage himself. He is part of the reason he underachieved. But I don't want to rip on Favre too hard because he was a great football player and he was a prolific passer. I am probably going to start sounding like a broken record at some point. With Peyton Manning, he was a 5-time NFL MVP, a 1-time comeback player of the year. He retired as NFL's all-time leader in passing yards and passing touchdowns. and he is certainly one of the greatest carriers of a team in NFL history. He led his team to 6 different winning records with a bottom half run game and a bottom half defense. His 9 seasons with 30 or more touchdown passes are top 3 all time. Peyton Manning is the current record holder for most passing yards and passing touchdowns in a season. He led the NFL in passing yards 3 times and led the NFL in passing touchdowns 4 times. And he had an incredible run between 2012 and 2014. 131 touchdown passes. That is an average of 43.7 touchdown passes a season. That is almost unheard of. So is Peyton the GOAT of quarterbacks? That's up for you to decide. He certainly has a case. Now I finally get to talk about the guy that gets my personal vote. We all know Tom Brady is a 6-time Super Bowl champion, but man, there's things about him that get overlooked. He was a 4-time Super Bowl MVP, and he actually has a very strong case as being the greatest carrier of a football team in NFL history. I could go on and on about this part, but for the sake of simplicity, Tom Brady averaged 300 or more passing yards per game in winning the Super Bowl or getting to the Super Bowl 5 times. Those averages are during the postseason. And as far as I know, I could be wrong here, but that is probably an NFL record. Tom Brady is one of 3 quarterbacks in NFL history to account for 80% or more of his team's offensive yards in a title run. The other 2 were Kurt Warner and Patrick Mahomes. It's also worth noting that Tom Brady was on the team that gave up the 4th, 5th, and top 10 most points by a Super Bowl winner. So of the Super Bowl winners, Tom Brady was on the team that had 3 of the 10 most points allowed. Food for thought right there. Tom Brady has the most and second most passing yards in a Super Bowl. Tom Brady's 13 game-winning drives in the playoffs are an NFL record by a wide margin. The next closest is John Elway with 6. Tom Brady's 9 fourth-quarter comebacks in the playoffs are also a record by a pretty decent margin. The next closest is Joe Montana with 5. Now, there's a couple of things that taint Tom Brady, supposedly. The first one I want to go over is the game-winning drives and the fourth-quarter comebacks. I'm sure that there are those people that will say he shouldn't be having his team in a position where he has to have a game-winning drive or has to have a fourth-quarter comeback. Okay, I mean, Joe Montana, when he had his game-winning drives in the Super Bowl, and people talk about how clutch he was. I'm not saying everybody. There are those people, though, that will say Tom Brady shouldn't have his team behind. So if Joe Montana makes these clutch plays, he's called clutch. But when Tom Brady makes them, he's forcing his team to have to come from behind. That's silly to me. When you win games in the NFL by 2 or more possessions, that is a blessing. You don't get to do that. Most games are decided by 1 possession. And Tom Brady made plays on 1 more possession than the opposition did. And also, if you're going to say he shouldn't have his team have to come from behind, well, how about you get him a defense that's going to allow single-digit points per game during the postseason? Because Joe Montana had defenses that allowed single-digit points per game during the postseason on multiple occasions. Don't get me wrong, because Tom Brady has indeed had good defenses, but not single-digit point per game good defenses. I mean, I could go on and on about that one, but that's just kind of silly to me. The other thing that potentially taints him is the Patriots cheating scandals. In all honesty, I don't even know where to begin with the cheating scandals. I want to talk about Deflategate. I could talk about Spygate at a different time, but in this video, let's just talk about Deflategate. I'm pretty sure I watched a video of an MIT professor or something like that pretty much destroy Deflategate. And it's like a deflated ball doesn't read the defense. The deflated ball doesn't know where to go. Tom Brady knows where to go with the deflated ball, but the deflated ball doesn't have any idea what to do. But that's just me. The reality is, with every one of these guys, you could write a book about how great they are, but I could probably write an even longer book about how great Tom Brady is. Drew Brees is going to retire with pretty much every passing record, it seems like. He is a 1-time Super Bowl champion and a 1-time Super Bowl MVP. He is the current leader in passing yards, yards per game, passing touchdowns, and completions. He is the current record holder for most consecutive games with a touchdown pass with 60. That includes the playoffs and the regular season. He is one of 6 quarterbacks in NFL history to throw 7 touchdown passes in a game. In all honesty, I'm going to downplay it a little bit because the 7 touchdown passes in a game is far from an unbreakable record at this point in NFL history. I believe someone will eventually get 8. It's just a matter of time before it happens. But back on a positive note, I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being Brees himself that breaks the record. His 5 seasons with a completion percentage of 70% or greater are an NFL record by a wide margin. The next closest is 2. However, with those 5 seasons of having a completion percentage of 70 or greater, only one of those seasons Brees had yards per completion above 12. So it tells us what we probably already knew. He was throwing shorter passes to get that completion percentage more than he was throwing deep passes. Still a nice record though, especially when the next closest is only at 2. Those 5 seasons of Brees having a completion percentage of 70 or greater are 5 of the 10 highest completion percentage seasons in NFL history with a minimum of 100 passes. Brees actually currently holds the best completion percentage in a season and the second best completion percentage in a season with a minimum of 100 passes. Brees led the NFL in passing yards 7 times and he led the NFL in touchdown passes 4 times. I mean, I've said it about pretty much every one of these guys at one point. Brees is an absolutely prolific passer, and while I personally probably wouldn't put him as the GOAT, he definitely deserves consideration. Also, I feel that I must note that Brees' passing touchdown record is far from safe. Tom Brady is hot on his heels, so he has to keep producing if he wants to keep that record. Now, I should put a disclaimer when I talk about Aaron Rodgers that there is a man named Rob Parker that makes me not want to like Aaron Rodgers or have any respect for him because I think Rob Parker is an absolute disgrace at his job. But I'll try to put my bias aside the best I can when talking about Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers has a case for having the best arm in the history of the NFL. In Rodgers' Super Bowl win, he accounted for 84.6% of his team's offensive yards. He didn't do that throughout the entire playoffs, but that's what he did in that game. Pretty solid. Rodgers is a 2-time NFL MVP. He has just 2 career pick sixes. Just 2. And that doesn't even qualify on leaderboards. He's not even top 200 all time in pick sixes thrown. Only 2.4% of Rodgers' interceptions were pick sixes. For some perspective of how otherworldly that is, 10.8% of Peyton Manning's interceptions resulted in a pick six. 7.8% of Brady's interceptions resulted in a pick six. 8% of Elway's interceptions resulted in a pick six. The guy with the lowest of these quarterbacks that I brought up is Joe Montana with 4.3% of his interceptions resulting in a pick six. So I don't care what era we're talking about. 2.4% of your interceptions being pick sixes is incredible. And Aaron Rodgers is already phenomenal at taking care of the football to begin with. But he's like the best thrower of interceptions in NFL history, dude. Like, his bad plays are the best of the worst. I don't know if that makes any sense, but hopefully it does. So, Rodgers is definitely talented, and he definitely deserves consideration as the greatest quarterback of all time. But I'll let you, the viewer, decide if he's the greatest quarterback of all time or not. Hopefully, I was able to provide a new perspective on who the greatest quarterback of all time is. I mean, I went with the basic answer, which is Tom Brady. But when I look at Tom Brady and his body of work, it's hard to come to any other conclusion. If the only Super Bowls he won were the 2014 and 2016 Super Bowls, that to me would be all he needed to cement himself as the GOAT. It definitely wouldn't have been enough to make him the GOAT in the eyes of pretty much everybody, but for me personally, it would have been. But of course, I'm just one guy. But it's always nice to have 6, I guess. But don't make any mistake, every one of these quarterbacks are great or were great, and they most certainly all deserved consideration as the GOAT. And also, please keep in mind, this is supposed to be fun. This isn't supposed to be hateful. It's fun to talk about our favorite football players. I didn't want to make this video to degrade any football players. I mean, I was a little more brutal than normal on some of them, but you know, it's supposed to be fun talking about this stuff. It's not supposed to be an angry conversation because I like pretty much every one of these guys. I'm glad they were able to showcase their talents, and I'm glad we get to watch their highlights. But yeah, that will be all for this video. Who do you guys think the GOAT is? Let me know in the comments below, and also be sure to check out my first part of this where I broke down quarterbacks before 1980. But yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.